Welcome to Speed Talk Live, which isn't really live, but a poorly produced podcast where we talk about NASCAR and all things racing. And occasionally we have a special guest or two, when we can get them to show up. Sit down, strap in, pull those belts tight. Speed Talk Live is on the air.
Pace car is in. Green flag, green flag, green flag.
All right, welcome everybody to another edition Speed Talk Live, coming out of Bristol. My name's Greg Engel, the editor of CupScene.com, contributor to Forbes, and Auto Week Weekend Motorsports editor. All things to everybody. Joining me, as always, the future Supreme Court of the United States Chief Justice, Owen Johnson. Hello, friend. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, over there in England. So you're going to law school. That's why I said that. And I know you work hard at it, but we're not here to talk about the law. We're here to talk about NASCAR. We're going to talk about Bristol, some other stuff on the news, and look ahead to Kansas. Hey, we've had the first cutoff race, so we had four drivers eliminated. I wish I could say four people so we could include women in that, but NASCAR still doesn't have a female driver in their top ranks in the Cup Series. Hoping that'll change. But we did have four drivers eliminated at Bristol. Look, here's the thing. Bristol was, to some people, a snooze fest. Okay, to a lot of people. There were a lot of fans that were complaining because Kyle Larson led 462 laps, the most in Hendrick Motorsports history. And that's a tall order, man. He led more laps than Jimmy Johnson or Jeff Gordon, any of those guys. And it was only surpassed by Cale Yarborough, who led 495 laps at Bristol in 1977, 47 years ago. So it was that kind of race. Now, here's the thing. To drive those cars on the edge of what they can do to get the top speed, to be able to weave through traffic like he did, and have perfect pit stops and everything going on, he had it all the entire weekend. He deserved to win that. But at the end of the day, we had Chase Elliott second, Denny Hamlin, who won the spring race here and won the fall race as well. Obviously was looking for a win because he wanted to advance to the playoffs in the next round. He got what he needed. He didn't get a win. So Hamlin's in. Chase Briscoe, my buddy Chase, who I think will be the biggest story in the playoffs if he goes through all the way with Stewart-Haas Racing. They're in. Among those out, Truex, Gibbs, Brad Keselowski, and, of course, Harrison Burton. Now, most people kind of knew Harrison wasn't going to go much past the first round. I kind of hoped he did. I have a certain affinity for him. He was my mom's favorite driver. But he didn't make it. Neither did Brad Keselowski. And Ty Gibbs, who made a valiant effort. Don't get me wrong. He made a valiant effort. He had a speeding penalty and was sent towards the back of the field, made a rally at one point, was up in the top 10, ended up 15th, didn't make the cut, while Daniel Suarez, who ended up, I think at one point he was like 4 laps down, ended up 2 laps down in like 30th position. He had enough of a points cushion coming into this race that Ty Gibbs never got high enough to knock him off. And that shows the importance of being strong through all 3 of these races in a round. And Daniel Suarez certainly wasn't in contention for the win, but he did well enough to advance to the next round of the playoffs where anything could happen. Now, here's the thing. We were looking at this race at Goodyear's tires in the spring, kept blowing. They kept wearing out. And at first, during the race, I remember they were talking to the Goodyear officials, and they're all worried what's happening to the tires, blah, blah, blah. We ended up with, 54 lead changes in the spring. That was incredible. It was an incredible race. For us watching, it was an amazing race. We didn't know who was going to blow a tire next, who was going to wear out, and it just turned out to be an incredible race. So Goodyear allegedly brought the same compound to this race. So we were expecting that, or at least a lot of fans were. I was a little skeptical because, see, in the fall race the year before, in which they had the same exact tire compound they brought in the spring race, only had eight lead changes. or I'm sorry, 10 lead changes last fall. And it was a good race. Denny Hamlin won it. Saturday night, we had officially had 8 lead changes. So it wasn't too different than the last fall race. Here's my thing. Here's what I think happened. Now, I'm not some big conspiracy theorist. I don't believe the world's flat. I don't wear a tinfoil hat. I suspect that Goodyear was a little embarrassed by the performance of their tires in the spring race, no matter what we saw on TV and on the track and during that race. I suspect that even though they said they brought the same compound that they did in the spring, I think they didn't. And if they did, it acted the same way as they did last fall: cooler temperatures, lower humidity, maybe the other factors that contributed to what we saw last fall. So it was another failure of the short track package for this next gen car. And so it looks like NASCAR still has to do some work on it. That, according to a lot of fans. Here's my feeling on this. Okay. The next gen car, the more they keep working on it, they're trying everything. They seem like they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at it: tires, splitters, different parts and pieces. And Denny Hamlin said on his podcast this week, which is more popular than this, I don't know why, but he said this week that they really can't afford to put, as a team owner, he can't really afford to buy more parts for the next gen car. So fooling with the tires seems to be the cheapest option. I don't disagree with that, but I'll tell you one thing I would like to see that they've been hesitant to do, and something that I think would change up the short track package a lot, is just to give them more horsepower. If you have more horsepower than you possibly need at a short track, then that's going to put the back in the driver's hands. Dale Earnhardt Jr. said this. Others have said that. I think that's what they need to do for the short track package, is to allow more horsepower. And I think they could tweak the engines they have to get more horsepower out of them, and take off some of the bumpers they have, so to speak, some of the rules that they have to keep these engines in check and in control, and give them that more horsepower. I think that would improve the short track package a lot. But you are right. For people to say, the short track package is not working because they're not seeing a lot of lead changes. Here's the thing: there was a lot of passing deeper in the field. I mean, let's face it. Yeah, Truex got stuck back in 24th after a speeding penalty after he ran up front, scored points in both stages. He looked like he was in a good position to move on. He got mired deep in the field, and people will say he wasn't passing. He wasn't able to pass, and it's the short track, package in the next gen car. But you had Ty Gibbs, who also had a speeding penalty, was sent deep in the field. He was able to make it back up in the top 10. Chase Briscoe didn't get a speeding penalty, but he had a slow pit stop, restarted, I believe, 18th. He was able to make it back up into the top 10. So they were able to pass. Here's what I think happened. I think that the drivers who were in the position to know that they were going to advance on points knew they had no chance of winning. Kyle Larson had them all locked up. So why are they going to take chances? If I'm in this position, say Denny, if I'm in the top 5 and I know I'm going to win, or I know I'm not going to win because Kyle Larson has the field covered, but if I stay in this position, I'll advance on points. I don't want to take any chances trying to mix it up and cause a crash, which can happen easily and quickly there at Bristol. So I think that's what we saw. The short track package still needs to be tweaked, put some more power in it. But I also think it was a product of the playoff drivers wanting to advance. I want to know your thoughts on this, Owen.
Well, I think just to that last point, conversely, Brad Keselowski, a driver who came in needing either a really, really good points day or a win, more likely a win, he had top 10 speed throughout the day, as highlighted by Auto Racing Analytics, pretty much all race, and just couldn't pass through the field. He ended up a lap down early and never got it back. Keselowski ended up mired back in 26th, obviously got eliminated, which I also believe means he failed to score a single point in the stages at any of the races in the first round of the playoffs. So really not a great playoffs for RFK, despite showing plenty of speed so far this year. But going back to the short track package, there hasn't been a single short track this season where we haven't spoken about it at some point. I asked drivers about it at Martinsville earlier this season, and the feedback was just overwhelmingly negative about the package. And the next gen just hasn't been good on short track since it was introduced. The only exceptions were Bristol in the spring, obviously, and possibly the last time we were at Richmond with multiple tire compound choices, as much as the finish overshadowed some of that racing. But that really leads me to believe personally that I think tires are a lot of the answer, getting the drivers on different strategies, bringing up the wear, putting it back in drivers' hands as much as possible, because both times I think that's really happened. The racing's been pretty good. But Kyle Larson, to your point, put up a post on Twitter saying that there's just never been much tire wear at Bristol, despite that track putting on great races in the past. And it's always been about working to get around other drivers, and more horsepower would do that, or some other way to make the car move around a little bit more, kind of upset the balance and on these short tracks. But honestly, whatever it is, I just don't understand the lack of big experiments from NASCAR. I was at a test last year at Richmond where they made some small changes to the underbody, and to their credit, they've tweaked the package and they've worked with the tires throughout the past couple of seasons. But so many in the industry have called for more horsepower, just more complete overhauls to the car. And I'd really like to see NASCAR trying some ambitious changes to see what works. It's not a knock on the next gen. I think it puts on incredible racing on mile and a half. And I think this has been one of the best seasons of racing we've had in a very long time in NASCAR. But NASCAR completely changed the horsepower and the aero throughout the lifespan of the Gen 6, the last car. And I'd like to see some of those big wholesale changes at this point for the sake of the short track product, which just isn't living up to expectations.
Yeah, so we both agree. I like the tire compound choices. I think could be something that they could look at, but there needs to be a starker difference. It's like in Formula One when they use the hard and the soft and the medium. There are big differences between that. Same with IndyCar. They have the big differences in the tire compounds. I don't think there's enough of a difference there. We kind of saw it at where we used the tire compounds a couple weeks ago because Chris Buescher put on some fresh rubber with a different compound, and it was a big difference. I think a combination of that, letting some more power in there could be the answer. But, we've got one more short track. We got Martinsville, which is going to be probably one of the most important races as it'll decide the final four. So we got one more short track race, but I hope between now and then they do some experimenting, and we'll see. But yeah, you're right. They still have some work to do. And I think that NASCAR, in order to keep costs down for everybody, is trying the cheapest option, which is tires. Right. So I really think that's what they're doing. But Kyle Larson also called this pretty much a spec car, which it is. And we want the parity, but I think they just need to open up the envelope a little more and in areas that doesn't cost the teams a whole bunch of money, right? And allow them to maybe breathe a little bit more or whatever it takes to get a little, open up that envelope more. But we'll see. We're going to Kansas this week. That was the closest finish in NASCAR history. We're going to talk about Kansas here in a minute. But you're right. The mile and a half tracks are the meat of this schedule. And on there and on the road courses, these have been fantastic cars. So CW had their first Xfinity broadcast, Xfinity race broadcast. They started early. They weren't going to start till next year. And all of a sudden, they decided to do the last 10 races. So they had theirs on Friday night. I didn't really notice a stark difference, maybe a few more commercials. And it was nice to hear Rick Allen back behind the mic, although I'm still a Lee Diffie fan. I think Lee calling the Cup races is fantastic. Rick Allen, he has his place in the sport. I think the Xfinity broadcast was great. But I know I didn't track the numbers. What did you find out about the numbers, Owen?
Well, I saw from, I think, Adam Stern, the CW drew in over 900,000 viewers, which is up by about 120,000 from last week's Xfinity series on NBC at Watkins Glen. So there's plenty of people tuning in. Seems like the CW's been advertising it pretty well. My only comment really is I'd like the app to start airing the race live. I think that was a big selling point when they kind of introduced themselves as a new TV partner for next year, and it only airs it now, a day after the actual race. I've seen that we're going to get that next season when the series is on the CW as planned for the TV deal. But that's something I will appreciate getting at some point. So it integrates the streaming services, which I really think are the future of sports broadcasting.
Well, see, you young people, that's what it's all on an app, right? You got an app for that. You got an app for that. So I didn't know that about the app. I didn't, I would never think. I do watch the NBC Sports app. I do subscribe to Peacock because the NBC Sports app, and I've noticed the last two qualifying sessions have been NBC Sports app only or on Peacock. You can't, but fortunately I got one of those smart TVs. I didn't get it. My daughter got it and set it up, and she's got the whole, Firefox, Firetail, whatever the thing is. So I'm all set up for streaming, and I know how to work it now. So I've been watching that. So I get that. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm kind of curious as to why they don't do that, because if they're gonna, if they're gonna be like giving their package a dry run, so to speak, in these 10 races, let's go all the way. Let's put it all the way out there so they can find out, if they have any problems with the app and things like that. Now I do use the NASCAR app for my scanner when I'm not home. At the track, obviously we have scanners, but I do use the NASCAR app. But the CW app, I didn't know that. But I'm not interested in watching, reruns of Young Superman. So, another app on my phone is not really what I like. So we'll see how the CW does going forward. And obviously I'll support them in any way we can and see how they do and see the lessons learned. So moving on, there was an odd and rare move in the middle of the season last week, and they announced this on Saturday at Bristol. Corey LaJoie and Justin Haley are swapping. So LaJoie is out at the end of the year at Spire, and they're going to replace him with Justin Haley, or Justin Haley's coming back. He raced for that team. Corey LaJoie, I think, is a great driver. I don't know if he's not getting along with people. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We may never know. Maybe Justin's bringing money with him. I don't know. But Corey is going to Rick Ware Racing, RWR, for the rest of the season. I think it's kind of odd that they did it in the middle of the season. But in a way, it makes sense. Neither car is in the playoffs. And it's a good time for both teams to see and get a heads up on 2025. Except that Corey LaJoie is not locked into RWR for next season, so this could be a tryout for him. But we'll see how that goes. What did you think of that move?
Well, I think it's an interesting one because Haley has really been outperforming in the 51 this year, driving that car, and so I think it's going to be a good gauge of whether LaJoie can get similar results. We'll see if, for whatever reason, LaJoie maybe hasn't been melding well with his crew and his team. Maybe he needs a fresh start, but it's really been a tough season for that 7 team. A lot of wrecks, a lot of failures to finish. And so I think if he can find a new team that hopefully works well for him for the rest of the season, that might be helpful in securing that ride and locking it down for the future.
And I hope he does. I like Corey. He's got a family history in the sport. He's been around for a long time. His dad raced in the sport. So I wish the best for him. So, and hopefully it's going to, help turn things around over there and improve the performance. And if they do, and they'll sign him to a contract next year. Somebody brought up, I heard on the internet, speaking of contracts, that if NASCAR really wanted to up the game in the sport, every driver should have a 1-year contract. And I think that's brilliant because it would force a driver. You would be on stage in fighting for your ride next year. So a year contract for each driver, boy, that would be great. I mean, some would be a lock, obviously, no matter where they finished. But I think some other drivers, you put everybody on a 1-year contract, that would be fantastic. I would love to see that. I don't know if you heard that. What do you think about that, Owen?
I mean, I'm sure the owners would love the chance to renegotiate with their drivers every year, but it definitely would be interesting, more pressure to perform. I think it's an interesting idea. When we renegotiate the charters, maybe that should be on it.
Yeah, we're 1 year. I just thought that was funny. It's never going to happen, obviously, because Hendrick wants to lock down his drivers and JGR wants to lock down their drivers. So we'll see. Harrison Burton, speaking of one of my favorite drivers, he's joining AM Racing for Xfinity next season. I wish him well. I think he's young enough. We'll see him back in the Cup Series at some point after he can prove himself over at AM Racing. And they've gone through a couple of drivers. So let's see how he does next year. with them in the Xfinity Series. And I was glad he found a ride because he deserves to be in the sport. He's a great driver and deserving to be in the seat. And speaking of family, he's another family. Obviously his dad raced for many years, his uncle and his cousin and everybody. So it's good to see that Harrison's got a ride. What do you think of that move for Harrison?
I think it's an interesting move to keep him inside the Ford camp. Obviously, he went to Wood Brothers Racing after driving for Toyota in the Xfinity Series. So I think it's interesting to keep those relationships alive. Obviously, the group that brought him to the Cup Series. So maybe there is a way back to the Cup Series in the future if he's sticking with them. That's all I was thinking about from that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, keep him in the Ford camp. I mean, Ford likes to keep their drivers, and I think it gives him confidence knowing that Ford has enough confidence in him to keep him in the fold, so to speak. So, if they need to move him back up to Cup for whatever reason, he'll be available. So that's good. In executive news, Ty Norris, who has been around this sport forever, I've known him forever. He's moving from Trackhouse to Colleague, and he's one of the most experienced journeyman executives in the sport. He was at Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, Michael Waltrip Racing, and helped them navigate through all the scandals there. The fuel gate at the Daytona 500, when they were caught using the wrong kind of fuel to try and improve performance, and of course there was the spin gate to try to get their driver to get Clint Boyer into the playoffs. I would never accuse him of knowing what was happening, but he helped that team navigate through that. So it's interesting to see his sudden split from Trackhouse to Colleague. He's going to Colleague Racing, and I'm sure that Colleague, gave some incentives to lure him over from Trackhouse to Colleague. What do you think of that, Owen?
Well, I think it's interesting that he's always followed the headlines from DEI to Michael Waltrip Racing, now at Trackhouse with Hale Mellon, the Project 91 SVG and Kimi Räikkönen car. But I spoke to Chris Rice, the team president at Colleague at Daytona and Darlington, when they announced their Xfinity lineup as they're trying to kind of rebuild that program. And he highlighted the big investment they're putting into their team. I feel like this is a very clear example of putting the investment in, getting the results. Someone who's very experienced, someone who knows his way around the sport. I think we'll see some results from it.
Yeah, and I'm sure Ty is whining all the way to the bank. So good for him. Good for him. He's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing, and any team would be glad to have him. So Trackhouse lost, his colleagues gain. Speaking of investments, Geico Insurance is ending their premier sponsorship at the end of the season, according to like you pointed out, Adam Stern from the Sports Business Journal. Is that a big deal or nah? I don't think it is a big deal because I think it gives the opening for another premier sponsor to come in. And I think Geico has just decided to take their money elsewhere. But I don't think that hole will be left unfilled for long. And of course, you don't remember the days when there was no premier sponsorship. It was just, it was Winston, and then it was Nextel, and then we only had one sponsor. Now you got all these premier sponsors. So to me, it's not that big a deal because I do think it opens up an opportunity for NASCAR to fill that hole. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not quite that young. I still remember the Sprint Cup and the Monster Energy Cup Series, but Stern pointed out that it's a deal worth it was a deal worth somewhere in the low seven figures. So it's a pretty significant source of income. Obviously, one of the top four partners for the Cup Series. But I don't see it necessarily as a sign that the premier partnership model is anyway broken or there's more to go, just because I think the insurance industry has been pretty volatile since the pandemic. I think NASCAR has been talking in the past about looking at other premier partners. So I imagine that hole will be filled reasonably quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Insurance companies have, especially here in Florida, if you want to get homeowners insurance here in Florida, you got to sell a kidney almost. But so yeah, they've been in trouble for a long time. So yeah, and that's not an aspect I thought of. It's just a company bringing their money elsewhere. So speaking of money, IndyCar Charters, the IndyCar series announced charters for their teams this week. They're going to be worth anywhere from 6 figures to 7 figures, low 7 figures. And I thought it kind of curious because I'm wondering what they learned from NASCAR. without actually seeing the wording on a charter for each side, I don't know what the differences are and things. I'm sure there's stuff unique to each of the sport, but at the heart, it's a motorsport. It's a team. They're fielding race cars on a racetrack and they're guaranteeing them entry. And I'm sure, Owen, you could look at the charters and tell me all the differences and highlight and cite legal cases and all that. But I one of the things that I found interesting, they're guaranteeing them. One of the things that is the same, they're guaranteeing entry to a charter team into every race except for the Indy 500. So you're not guaranteed to get into the Indy 500. I love that. I think that's fantastic. I think it adds more drama and intrigue to Indy, and I think it could really be a news item to have a small team that could bump a chartered team out. And I wonder if NASCAR set up and paid attention to that. And what do you think about NASCAR doing that for the Daytona 500? I think that I'd be all for that.
I would definitely be for it. I don't see it happening necessarily because I just think the Indy 500 at this point is so different than the Daytona 500. I mean, I always come back to the stat that something like 70% of Indy 500 viewers never watch another race in the IndyCar schedule. It's such a big event, and where NASCAR got rid of the speed weeks, IndyCar still has the month of May with Bump Day and Carb Day, and qualifying is still as big a spectacle as it's ever been. Drivers like Fernando Alonso having to contend for a spot in the Indy 500. So I think being able to get bumped out, no matter what kind of pedigree you have as a driver, is just such an integral part of that race. Also, in terms of championship implications, Daytona 500 is just another race for NASCAR, whereas the Indy 500 pays double points for IndyCar. So there's already something kind of treating it differently as a championship, making it a little bit more special, a little bit more motivation not to get bumped out and go home. And there's some precedent for treating it differently. I'd like to see it for NASCAR. I just don't see that ever happening.
So let's double the points for the Daytona 500. What do you think? So we could steal that idea from them. But I really do. I really am on board with the, with the non-charter. The charter doesn't guarantee you an entry into the Daytona 500. I think it could make speed weeks more, bring speed week back. We don't have speed weeks anymore because we qualify on Wednesday and Thursday. So it's not a week like it used to be. I think it could be more important if we did a qualifying session on the Sunday before, like we used to. And then the team that was on the front row and the team that made it in could have the whole week to celebrate that and use that and market it. So, hey, NASCAR, look at that. Let us know. And it was Owen and I's idea. All right. Let's move to Kansas. So we're going back to Kansas. We were there in May this weekend. Kyle Larson won there, obviously in May, in the closest finish in history. And we kind of touched on that, denying Chris Buescher a chance in the playoffs. And we've already talked about Chris feeling bad about that. 1/100th of a second he won that race, so it was great last time, but it also shows that Kyle Larson may not be as dominant as he was at Bristol, because he did win, but it wasn't an overwhelming win, and it wasn't a runaway like we saw at Bristol last week. Tyler Reddick won there last season, so while Larson seems a shoe-in for the next round, he could definitely win Kansas again, or do well. And he seems like he's going to be able to make it to the next round. If he messes up at Kansas, if something happens, a bad pit stop, or he gets caught up in a crash like Atlanta, or something happens like that, I think he's in serious danger of not advancing, because Talladega, he has never done all that spectacular at, and it is a wild card race. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But you did pick him last week for Bristol. I know that. I meant to mention that because he was your pick last week. I think this is my pick for this week. I'm going to go with Chris Buescher because I think he's going to be on a redemption tour. I think he definitely shows us he has the speed, and I think he's going to go and want to like, in Larson's face at losing there in the spring. And I remember Tony Stewart a couple years ago won at I forget, I think it was Chicagoland. We still raced there, and he was out of the playoffs, and he had been eliminated, and he came there and won, and it was kind of thumbs up, the nose up to everybody else that was in the playoffs. So that's my guy this week, is Chris Buescher.
Well, I have to celebrate the rare occasions I get my pick right. But I think Buescher's a good pick. He has already played spoiler once in the playoffs at Watkins Glen this year. So he definitely knows how to get the win in the postseason already. But I'm going to take someone kind of on the bottom end or the other end of the average finish chart. Maybe not the best performance overall at Kansas, but a team that knows how to perform in the playoffs, and that's the Penske drivers. They haven't won in a mile and a half, discounting Atlanta, which races like a super speedway at this point, since Ryan Blaney won in the Coke 600 last year. But all three Penske drivers had a really good first round, rising to the challenge in the playoffs. Logano obviously got the win in the first race of the last round at Atlanta. And I think this time it's going to be the 12 team and Ryan Blaney who gets the win in the first race of this round.
That was your second correct pick this year, by the way. I forget the other one, but you made another correct pick. So, yeah, I think that's a solid pick. Penske has been doing well. Blaney looked good Saturday night, and Logano, like you said, won the first race in this round. So could he do it again? I think Penske could. I think they've got something under control there. And they've still got all three of their cars in the playoffs. They can't say that. JGR can't say that. Certainly. So we'll see. That'll be interesting to watch. So we'll see Kansas this week. We will get back next week and talk about Kansas and how it plays out. That is, if I don't get raked over by a hurricane that's coming barreling up the coast here in Florida, but I think I'll be fine. It's going to skirt, and Helene is not a mean name. I wish they would name hurricanes mean names, right? Like Hurricane Hades or something, because Helene sounds like an old math teacher that I had in elementary school, and she didn't scare me. And this hurricane doesn't scare me either. Of course, I went through Hurricane Andrew. I was stationed in Homestead, so that was like a big lawnmower coming across. We're not going to have that problem. So we'll be back here next week talking about Kansas and looking forward to the final playoff race of that round, which will be Talladega. Listen, everybody, have a great week. Stay safe. If you're in Florida, batten down the hatches, boys and girls. Make sure you got your hurricane supplies, blah, blah, blah. Go up, buy all the bread. Go buy all the milk. Leave all the wine and whiskey for me. All right. Thanks, Owen. I appreciate it, my friend. We will see you next week, and we'll see you next week. Like, subscribe, support this channel. We appreciate it. Have a great week, everybody. See ya. Thanks for listening to Speed Talk Live. For questions or just to tell us how bad our production is or to leave other feedback, leave us a comment below. For all the latest NASCAR news, visit www.cupscene.com. Until next time, peace out and let's go racing.
All right, there's the checkered flag. Great job, driver.